Welcome to the September 20th, 2023 Finance Subcommittee of the Brookline School Committee. We're going to start right off with acceptance of the minutes of May 17th, 2023, which was the last time we met, believe it or not. So can I get a motion for approval?
Sure.
Thanks. Andy, do you want a second?
Sure.
Okay. Andy, how do you vote?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, that's the first item. Second item is acceptance of gifts. And let me pull up the memo. I thought I had it open, but I don't. There's one gift from Donald Balberchak for $100 for the Queer Student Union at the high school, which is wonderful. So we thank him. And can I get a motion to accept the gift? I'll take Suzanne as the yes and Andy as the second. So Andy, how do you vote?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Next item on the agenda is the grants. So there was, if you looked at an earlier version of the grant memo, it had an additional grant that's been pulled at this time. So right now, the version of the grant memo that you should be looking at is the one that was circulated this morning, Betsy?
Around 11:30, yes.
Yeah, okay. So it has 1, 2, 3, 4 grants on it. The first one is from the state. It's a nursing grant for $200,000 for the next 2 years. It's $100,000 a year. And that is basically a supplement that we've received over multiple years for nursing services. The one after that is from the Innovation Fund, and we're going to have a little bit more discussion about that in a moment. So I'm just going to put that one aside. The third one, and the Innovation Fund is for about, it's $263,000 in salary, and then there's an additional $44,000+ in possible reimbursements for non-salary costs. Then there's an NEA Foundation grant, and that's for a some sort of ponic. I can't remember what they called it. It's not terraponic, which I guess is dirt based. Food plants in the high school, and that's for $4,050. And then the last one is for funding to support Steps to Success students. That is a grant that comes from the state to Brookline. So those are the 4 grants. Does anyone have any questions or comments on any of them, except let's put Innovation Fund to the side for now? Helen?
So I have one question. The terraponics was really interesting to me. Hi, Sasha. And I was wondering, where is that going to be housed? And who's going to be doing it? And it's $4,000.
I think it's in the cafeteria, but Sasha, I bet you know, so why don't you answer that
Yeah,
question?
that's why I asked Sasha.
There you go. Softball for Sasha.
Yes, it is. It is in the Greeno campus at BHS in the cafeteria. And myself, Roger, are working with students from alternative program to do the planting, harvesting, and as an education, a form of additional education, outdoor gardening kind of education.
But where is it being planted, inside or outside?
Inside. It's all of it is inside the cafeteria. It's at the back of the cafeteria. There's a wall. They're basically racks, different tier racks with lights on it, and the plants.
Come and see it.
It is. We're hoping to have a number of partners or interesting parties to come and do our first planting. So I'll make sure I'll invite you.
Please do. I like gardening. So please do. Thank you.
Thanks, Sasha. Thanks, Helen. Okay, any other questions on the other ones before we turn to Innovation Fund? Okay, we're joined by Britt and by Anthony from BHS to talk about Innovation Fund. So the Innovation Fund has, and there's the detailed program. You can see the letter from the Innovation Fund. There's 6 different areas, well, 5 areas plus a program liaison that are funded. And the reason I thought it might be helpful to talk a little bit more about it is that as we were talking about yesterday at curriculum, there's a lot of questions about staffing at the high school, and it might be good to get all of the questions about how any of these, and also I should say that Anthony sent out a weekly warrior message this week alluding to some of the classroom staffing changes and some of the Innovation Fund programs. And so this is an opportunity to clarify and talk about what is on the table for Innovation Fund for this upcoming, well, for this current fiscal year, and help clarify whether or not there are actually any impacts of Innovation Fund on the staffing and classroom size questions that we've been discussing and that the community's been discussing. So with that preface, Anthony, do you want to just talk a little bit about what's going on, or Britt, I don't want to predetermine, but do you want to talk a little bit about the Innovation Fund grant and answer any of the questions around staffing at the same time? Is that helpful? Or do you want me
I
to
think that's
take
great.
it?
No, I
Okay.
think I think that framing is terrific. I'm sorry that I was a minute or two late. But I think one, as I expressed to everybody on a call yesterday, including Helen and Mariah, my communication, my weekly warrior had the best intentions, which is to acknowledge we've got larger class sizes than is typical. And I wanted families and students to know that going into the drop add period, where there tends to be some level of movement between levels, between courses, and we just don't have the same space as we would typically have. And so I wanted to be clear that I thought there were multiple contributing factors. And so talked about funding some critical priority areas, which I'm happy to speak about. I don't know, that seems to be more a curriculum subcommittee matter, but you all can steer
We're going to
me.
talk about, if it's okay, since we actually have advisory committee members here. And Betsy, do you mind promoting Carolyn since she's on advisory? And then, sorry to interrupt you, Anthony.
No, you're great.
Just so you know, right, we will talk about that just so we close the loop on the questions that were asked.
Sure, great.
on
No,
this.
I know
Okay.
Cliff Brown, Runkle parent and former Brookline High parent, had some questions that I tried to answer via Susan, just sharing some responses. So I felt like there were a few different areas that contributed to large class sizes. Named some critical priority areas, which we can speak to in a moment, named some programs rolling off the Innovation Fund, which we then needed to make a decision about what we could fund within our high school budget. And then, you know, our contribution to the $1.85 million budget deficit. So why don't I speak to the Innovation Fund? I think one thing that's really important to emphasize is generally anytime a program, I want to say almost any time, so 98% of the cases, I made that percentage up, but it's close. We are backfilling positions that are Innovation Fund funded. And so as we prepare to launch the Queer Student Program, the first program on your list, something we're really excited about that points to a need within the high school that our expert faculty and staff saw, that Britt as a liaison helped turn into a grant, or helped the team turn into a grant. We realized that Kate Leslie would be funded at 0.2 for the Queer Student Program, that then the Innovation Fund, we backfill those positions so that 0.2 goes elsewhere to someone else filling her role, and the same thing down the line. So an English class that Zach Brokenrope was going to be taught still needs to be taught, and the funding is still there to do that. So I think what you're—
Can I just repeat one thing you're saying, but I just want to emphasize it. just so
Please.
that, which is that the 2.65 FTE that are in the letter, those aren't actually getting deducted because those funds are being used to actually redeploy other people. So we're not losing classrooms or FTEs in that way, because this is an additive process, or it's at least a neutral process in that way.
Correct. And
Okay.
Britt, you can speak to, but thank you, Mariah, for
I just want to
saying it
make
more
sure, right?
crisply.
Yeah.
No, I
Yeah.
appreciate the crisp wording around it. I think that's right. No, I know that's right.
Right, and
Um,
I think, Anthony, to jump in, part of the complexity is about how the high school's scheduling and sectioning process has some complexity to it, given the scope of our program, right? We're fortunate to be a school with a very diverse set of programs and courses. So for instance, a course like data science or climate science, one is a math course supported by the Innovation Fund, one is interdisciplinary, pulling from social studies and from science. A student in their requests may request climate science instead of a different science class. And thus we're looking at it alongside the larger scheduling picture. And the fund is a partner in supporting the replacement FTE to allow us to seed and try new courses. And again, as a coordinator, when we are in the process of sectioning, we are looking at the data in terms of requests for those courses alongside the rest of our program, and making decisions about our staffing model in that way. I don't know if that helps.
Meaning that you're filling a climate science class like it's a regular any other class. It's not being treated as a different thing. It's treated alongside any other class and counted in the total number of sections of science that you need. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yes, it's
yes,
not.
and yeah. go ahead.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And we are being supported with the replacement FTE to make sure that the science classes that teacher is being pulled from can be covered. And we are, as we think about the endurance of things outside of program, right? When they are coming off the fund, we're looking at requests, as we always do for classes when we make decisions about how sections run. And I think that might be a piece that could be clarified or people have questions about. And I'm happy, as the liaison who supports the fund and as a curriculum coordinator who's lived it with my own staffing, to help address questions.
Anthony, do you mind answering the question that came from advisory about how much, just going back to your
Sure.
email,
Yeah, please.
how much was the money, or we could talk about FTE's money, did PSB have to pick up
Sure.
those specific things?
Great. It's a great question. So in general, as programs are scheduled to roll off of the fund, we have a responsibility to decide, is this a course we want to continue to offer? And if so, in what way can we continue to offer that? So it means that sometimes classes that are taught by 2 staff members, so it's a 2.0 FTE for a course of say 25 to 30 students, generally I would say we're not able to do that. That's too expensive a model. And so hopefully enough capacity has been built across that team so that it can be a single teacher. So that's likely what's going to happen with climate science and social change at the end of this year, is it'll roll off and be taught by a single teacher. Mariah's specific question, echoing what Cliff Brown rightly asked, was how much are we talking about? It's a 1.0 FTE. We had 0.6 that we needed to add to have the restaurant fully staffed at 2.0, and Britt can speak to the particulars of that. I would just say in at least curriculum subcommittee, and I believe the entire school committee has heard the importance of the restaurant, heard about the importance of the restaurant program, the size, the diversity of kids it supports. And so we increased our restaurant staffing at first through the Innovation Fund, reimagining the entire program, knowing that a bill was coming due and that we would need to begin sectioning with an understanding that we would need to find 0.6 FTE. The other 0.4 of the 1.0 I mentioned was for our advisory program, which the Innovation had funded for actually 4 years, 3 original years, and then an extension. And we needed to right size it. The Innovation Fund was very generous. originally supporting it at 0.8 FTE as we reimagined it. And now we're supporting it out of PSB budget funds at 0.4. What that means is we enter sectioning, you know, already committing 1.0 FTE to these programs. Mariah, is that, those are the pieces that I think I responded to Cliff.
Yep, I think that relating to that, long story short, it's a 1.0 FTE that was the innovation fund impact from we'll say last year to this year. Is that right? Okay, Susan and Helen, do you want to, is this specifically about like this question of the 1.0? There's so many hands up. Okay, go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, I was just going to say that when I look back over the last 5 years, the Innovation Fund has actually paid for between 2.2 to 3.0 FTE. It may be different people each year, but it's a fairly consistent number of FTE. And I know when Anthony and I were putting together the staffing plan for this year, we looked at what staff were charged against the Innovation Fund. There wasn't, at least for this year, there was no adding of actual staff members. It was rather a shift of what existing FTE was over to what was going to be charged in the fund. So in my view, it's more a subsidy, a recurring subsidy to support the high school program in general, rather than people being funded independently for these particular innovative projects. So I just wanted to make note of that so that there was a little bit of clarity. In other words, when you're building the high school schedule, there's a certain number of FTE that's required. We're not, at least for this year, and Anthony, you can clarify further, but at least for this year, we're not adding any FTE because of that. Is that true for years as well, Anthony?
Sorry, Anthony, go ahead.
No, I think I would need to look at our last year's funding. I think the new program that we've added for this year is the Queer Student Program. And I'd need to look back at I think that's generally true. I just need to look at what rolled off a year ago to make sure that that's accurate. But of the programs, all of them are continuations besides the Queer Student Program.
But we're not actually adding staff.
But we are adding programs though. That's the rub of the whole thing, right? Is that, and it's not that the programs are bad, but the question is when you design a new program and then you don't staff the program, and you're in a zero-sum model of FTEs,
How far can you stretch? Right?
Exactly. How far can you do that? And this is why we're talking about this a lot. And how do we improve our budget process so that we all look at each other and say, hey, this is a great program that you should pilot, and then we should make a plan for if you decide to keep it, what's our plan in X years when it no longer is on, assuming it plays out the way you hope it will, what's our plan so that we aren't robbing classroom time to pay program time. That's my thinking about it. Helen, go ahead.
Except that it's also classroom time. So you have X number of students. They can take Y number of classes. They can decide to take one class or another class.
But that's not what these are, Helen. This isn't new courses. The Queer Student Union or Queer Student Program, for example, that's my point. I'm not talking about the curriculum or courses.
I'm talking about like the
right. I'm talking about programs. I don't have an issue with the curriculum or the coursework. It's the programs which concern me because we're taking away that staffing from.
Okay, we're talking one FTE here, if I understood you correctly. I mean, how many FTEs total do you have in the high school?
All told, a lot, well over 200 FTE when you include paraprofessionals, if you include clerical.
No, not paraprofessionals, just classroom teachers, unit A.
I don't know the exact number, but I think that's part of what the larger conversation for me is. what is our overall FTE? How has that evolved over the last 4 years or 5 years?
And what is your population?
Right. And
And
That's
how is
exactly
it-
it, Helen. If he has, say he has 100 or 120, which I think is roughly the ballpark, it's in that range, something like that ish, right, Anthony? Am I misremembering 140?
You
I don't
said
know.
200?
more
the
than
point
that.
is-
Yeah.
No, 200 including his pairs, but there's a lot of pairs there too. So, but anyways, the point is one a year or a couple a year, if between the attrition we have and everything else, it can make a difference if we think about it over time. It's like just a nibbling of the cheese. And
One of the things we used to do when we approved new courses in curriculum was to ask what courses are going off.
Agreed. And Susan and I have had that conversation as she is coming on board. And I think just to be clear, we are in agreement with Mariah that we want to look at our budgeting process, because I think we have the right people in the room. How that information is then shared with district leaders and school committee is important. You know, Gabe, as Senior Director of Teaching and Learning for 8th to 12th grade, is embedded in the program committee for the Innovation Fund. He's also embedded in our sectioning process, joining all budget and section meetings. And that's something Linus and then I believe Leslie and I agreed would be important as Gabe was getting oriented to the high school. So I'm saying, I think we have lots of the pieces, but how that information is shared certainly needs attention.
Britt?
I think the distinction, Mariah, that you bring up between curriculum and program is exceptionally important. And I think part of the 1.0 Anthony named in the restaurant, I'm intimately aware of, being the coordinator of that program, right? In my budget narrative dating back to fiscal year 20, I was highlighting in our budget process, staffing is an essential thing to think about. We need to make sure that we're retaining and building upon as we step into the new space. What is core to the work we do. We are an educational program in that it is a sequence of courses that students can be in over their years. And my staff are teachers in my department, just like I have taught business and we have a computer science teacher. So again, I think of the fund as a partner that really helped us float the staffing that we needed, that I was highlighting in my earliest years as a coordinator in our budget process, to get us to stepping into the new space in the way that we wanted to. And Anthony knew from the beginning, as he said, Gabe and our district level partners, that there would come a time where that partnership couldn't be the forever solution to the staffing model that is required. So I think absolutely there are some innovative ideas that seed through the fund. And the question we ask ourselves is, what is the long-term plan to make this sustainable? And it's baked into the application process of how we look through ideas at the fund. And I think, as Anthony said, certainly that conversation, particularly as we have new folks at the district level joining us, is a conversation we should have. And my experience, both as an educator and a coordinator, is that the Innovation Fund steps towards us when we name the priority work of the high school and helps us execute that, even as all other things environmentally in the budget shift around us, as they always do and must in the schools. So the distinction matters, that some things are new program, and certainly we should look critically at the process around that. And some things we are able to support that are priority, even though they are not new program and they are curricularly. And I would, Anthony, correct me if I'm wrong or out of my lane, I would think that the restaurant has always been, I've been at BHS since 2009. It has always been a core curricular experience of the high school. That is not new. The fund allowed us to innovate on that model, but it was not an addition of anything that did not previously exist.
Great, thanks. Suzanne?
Yes, I'm a little muddied here in my thinking. I'm trying my best. I'm holding on to Susan's idea that the Innovative Fund is a subsidy to the high school. And so when you think about, so there were a lot of 0.2 positions in the fund that are being supported and paid for by the fund. But when you pull someone out from for 0.2 of a classroom teacher, then someone has to take that spot if that classroom is needed. And so that's where I feel like we've lost what do we say, 2.6 FTEs. If they're going to a program, if they're going to a classroom, then they're still providing that to our students. But if they're going to a program and they don't have a class, then we are down a 0.2 class. And a 0.2.
I don't think that that's right though, Suzanne, because what
Okay.
happens is say so-and-so was going to teach A block. I'm making this up.
Uh-huh.
Now they're not teaching A block. They're off doing program development or curriculum development, and someone else is sitting in that desk teaching a class in the
Right.
like,
So you
so
have
there's not being lost.
Not being lost, that
There's still a
FTE,
person.
Kate Leslie gets funded 0.2, she retains her 1.0, which we're
Right.
contractually obligated. And then the 0.2 that the district had before is now freed up. And so Gary or Jen now, Gary Schiffman or Jen Martin, as we're engaged in sectioning, looking at student choices, looking also very carefully at staff. Where are we? What do we need filled? We've got this extra 0.2, it can go to this person, or it can be a new hire, it can be a new part-time hire. So
Yeah,
we
no-
do not lose those FTE. The 2.6 are still receiving district funding, they're backfilled. The example is more, as we began sectioning, we were 1.0 down is another way to say how this last year began.
So that was actually what the point I was trying to make, that they have to be backfilled. They can't be, you can't just say we're moving this person over without backfilling the class that person had. That's
Right.
actually what I was trying to say.
But
Right.
that
When people
backfilling
go
is
up- yeah,
paid
when
for by the fund.
Well,
And
no,
I
the
think-
backfilling is not paid for by the fund. The
Yes,
program
it-
development's paid for by the fund, which frees up operating budget to pay
Okay,
this section.
okay,
Yes.
thank you. Sorry.
That's okay. Susan, you were trying to say something, and I want to bring us to conclusion because I know Anthony has to go dance with the stars or something like that. And Britt probably wants to go home too.
Well said, well done.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is that, and in addition to that, there are people that are on the fund last year that are rolling off the fund. And if that course is not being offered, or even if it is, they're there to pick up the section that then is available, because a person that is now moving on to the fund is going to be moving off of their section. Do you see what I'm saying? So every
So-
year, do you follow me? That's why I say it's a subsidy, because
Yeah,
there's
I
some
agree.
people, yeah.
Yeah,
there's
no, I
some-
agree. And it's paying for 2.6 new positions, right?
Right, of
Mhm.
this year, if you look at it, only 0.4 of the 2.65 is going to program and not direct classroom instruction. So the majority of the FTE allocation is not going to someone pulled not in front of students doing program work.
Right.
And
So let's close the loop on that, Britt, because I want us to talk about that. So there's 6 different categories that Innovation Fund is funding. There's 0.6 FTE for the Queer Student Program, which is the one, if I am correct, Britt, is the programmatic as opposed to curricular one. Then the Social Justice Leadership Program, which is a course, it has a 0.2 FTE. Data Science, which for social justice, which we had talked about last year at school committee, is a 0.6 FTE. SEL Tutorial is a 0.6 FTE, Climate Change and Social Justice is a 0.4, and then the Program Liaison is a 0.25. So I think it's actually two of the 6 areas, but only one of the 5 programs. Is that correct, Britt?
correct, and of
Okay.
the queer student program,
Yes, this is important.
0.2 of the 0.6 is going to program, and 0.4 of the 0.6 is going
It's
to classroom
teaching. Right.
instruction.
Is that
So
what
Kate,
course
Kate
is
is playing Kate is sort of taking the leadership role, and Julia Mangan and Emily Hunt are co-teaching and co-creating the advanced wellness class.
Oh, okay.
So that is,
that
and
we heard about from last
you'd
year?
heard about,
Okay.
and I think that's an important, that it's not merely 0.6 program. There is an instructional, educational learning component in that.
Super helpful and not shown in the letter, not reflected in the letter. Okay. So Helen gets the last comment, and then we're going to take a vote on grants. Go ahead, Helen.
The grant, this grant usually comes to the school committee in April or May, June at the latest, when they know how much money they have. Why has it been delayed? And can we make sure that in the future it comes at the right time of year and not at this time of year?
I would say I appreciate the question. I think that's a larger question for our district and town to wrestle with. I think there were inner workings in the innovation fund that we were trying to figure out. And at some point I can tell you the story, it's not tonight, about how Kira Flynn Carson ended up getting funding for social justice, which I'm happy she did, but that's a course we've already run for a while. But I think there were lots of moving pieces in the budget, and thus a clear picture of what all was being funded. I mean, ideally it wouldn't have been June 30th, which I think is when it's dated. But I think some of it was override and other pieces, sectioning and reductions, which I think to me is the larger conversation about making clear to school committee, here's how we section, here's what budgeting looks like at the high school, and here's the support our district leaders provide us. And I imagine there's no doubt that there's work to be done, because we have more larger, I predicted and we predicted some of these larger classes. They're more than I would have predicted. And it's not where I want us to be. And I don't think it's where any of us want us to be.
But I think the other point, just to follow up on what Helen just said, is the letter is dated June 30th. And even if it didn't show up until mid-July, hopefully it could have maybe just gone to a full school. I have no idea how it got from wherever it went to A&F and who was there to receive it, if it just fell through the cracks somewhere. But if there was an actual process thing that we could fix, I do think it is, given that school committee was supposed to accept the award and people were started to be paid weeks to months ago, it would have been nice to actually have approved the award before people were paid. And it's still not being approved today, because this still now has to go to full school committee after this. This is just a recommendation. Suzanne, do you have a real quick thing on any of
Yeah, it
this?
was so quick. I was just going to say that point, Mariah, that it's already in place. People are already doing the work and supposedly getting paid. So it does seem as if the timing for our approval is off, that it should have been earlier. So in case we said no, for some reason, you would have made other changes or plans.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that this speaks to, and Susan and I have already been talking about this, I think there's two big lessons learned from this one. One is, we've talked about this already, how to improve the forecasting of what's rolling off, or innovation fund, so that it actually shows up, and we talk about, is the high school eating it, or are we adding it, and figuring that out, because that's really important. And then the second part is how in general grants get, what's the process for approval, and how do we make sure that school committee is ahead of things, so that we don't end up being given something that by law we're required to accept, but we don't want to accept, and then that's a horrible moment. I'm not saying that this one is the case, but there's a larger conversation about just grant process and making sure we're doing things timely and in the right order. Okay, enough about grants for now. Can I get a motion for approval of the grants? Thank you, Suzanne. Andy, do you want a second? Okay, Suzanne, how do you vote?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
And I'm going to vote yes too, because I appreciate all the conversation we had today. I was definitely feeling stressed out about the issues with process and all of that, but I think that's really good conversation today, and we're all reaching somewhere good. So that goes unanimously to full school committee. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Britt, and thank you, Anthony, for coming. I appreciate it. And now we're going to skip ahead.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Anthony, are you still there? Did I lose him? Yeah, it's okay. For those of you who are from advisory, and Cliff had submitted questions on behalf of advisory, there was another question that we didn't talk about because it doesn't relate directly to the Innovation Fund, but those answers will get provided later on. next item on the agenda that
We
we're going
just
to go
approved all
to.
of the grants, right, Mariah?
We did. Yep, that was
Okay,
all of them.
okay.
I want to skip ahead to number 6, which is discussion and possible vote of FY24 food service fees, because Sasha is here and I don't want to make you wait any more, Sasha, than you already have. So, so I just want to remind the committee that last year it had been brought to our attention by some of the PTOs that students who had free and reduced lunch status, some of them had been purchasing second meals or a la carte options, which weren't covered by the free and reduced lunch status, and so they were actually accruing lunch debt, I guess that's food service debt, to the tune of quite a bit of money. And so we had voted as first a finance subcommittee and then a full subcommittee to a full school committee to waive, retroactively waive any of the accrued fees. And then for the rest of FY23, we were going to waive all of the second meal, second lunch and a la carte options and see what the actual cost of that was before we went into FY24. Because we didn't meet between May and September, we didn't actually do this before the beginning of the fiscal year, but I wanted to bring it to us tonight so that we can talk about that. You all received a memo, a wonderful memo from Sasha to Susan in your packets. And essentially the free reduced student meals that you see in the packet, the value of that was $10,756. Sasha, was that value the entire year value, including the dollars? Okay, so that was like July 1st to June 21st. Is that accurate?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
So the value of that entire amount was $10,756 dollars, and you can see the breakdown was almost 90% or so second meals and a 10% or so a la carte. And so the question is, does the school committee? Oh, and then also just a reminder that the prior debt that had been that was accrued up to that point for prior years was 38,000. That had already been wiped out. So everyone all the way prior to FY23 and for the FY23 balance, all of that debt was wiped. And the question is, does finance committee want to move recommending to full school committee that we also wipe the that we waive the second lunch and a la carte options for free and reduced lunch status for FY24 as well? Suzanne?
Yeah, I'm wondering, Sasha, if you wouldn't mind, just going through this a little bit. I have 2 questions. I'm
Okay.
sorry. One is, how do we know students are now free or reduced, since you don't have to apply for that? And then secondly, are other students who are not qualified as free and reduced, are they purchasing, since everybody's now getting free food, do they then purchase their second lunches or a la carte?
That's great. That's awesome. That's a great question. Your first question, how do we know students who are free and reduced? We're still collecting application. The issue with that is not all who would qualify will be submitting or has submitted application. So you are
Right.
gonna have situations where ordinarily students who would qualify is not this year because they did not submit an application. We continue to send those information out that if you think you may qualify, still submit an application because it's very useful. And secondly, any student that is not free and reduced, or that is not, any student that is purchasing a second meal is going to be charged. Students currently who have a paid status are being charged for that meal.
Okay,
So
I
any
guess
second meal on our card,
yeah, I mean, I guess I am a little concerned about students who would be eligible, maybe, but have not submitted an application because they're getting the meal free now. So I guess it does take a little bit of marketing and PR actually to make sure that people know that would help them qualify for additional food.
I will say as a parent, Suzanne, that we get many communications from
Okay.
Sasha. There's the communication, there's multiple electronic communications that come before the start of school, and at the start of school, we've gotten at least one communication in our homeschool folder so
Yeah, okay.
far. Yep. So
Okay. I just want to make
I'm
sure
just telling you my experience. I don't know
yeah,
that
no,
it's
I know, and I believe you.
universal.
I know Sasha would do this. I just you know, maybe I'm putting a plug out there for people who think they might qualify, that they should in fact apply. They've got nothing to lose and a lot to gain. So anyway, okay,
Please
thank you.
do. That's helpful, Helen, to remind families to do submit applications if they think they might qualify.
And I think too, using this as, you know, an example of an additional benefit for doing that.
Right.
Those
That's right.
students, yeah, would be eligible for snacks as well as second meals should they feel the need to eat a little bit more to sustain themselves.
Yeah.
So
And Sasha, when the bill gets sent to people, it has on it saying if you think you're eligible, like here's where to apply, right? It gives them
Yes,
the
it
link
does.
right there.
It
So
does.
it's, yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank
Helen?
you.
Yeah, I'm wondering, two questions, because one, I don't remember on either of them. What is your total revenue for the year, and what is still in the revolving fund now?
So for FY23 last year, we had a revenue of over almost $4 million. What is in the revenue currently as of a few days, I'd have to
I don't
right
need to know.
right off the top of my head, I
Yeah.
would have to go through, but I know we closed the year with a surplus of over $1 million.
Okay, thank you.
It's good context to just put $10,000 in context for everyone of what we're
Exactly.
actually talking about. Thank you, Helen.
Yeah.
Is right. This isn't like this, the account's not going into the red over this. Any other questions before we take a vote? Okay. Then the motion, which Sasha and Susan very helpfully provided us, to waive all non-reimbursable food charges in FY24, non-reimbursable by the federal or by the state government, I presume, in FY24 for students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch, and request that staff provide an analysis of the total cost of this waiver by product category for FY24. So basically closing out the year again for us. I'll move that. Can I get a second? Thanks, Andy. Suzanne, how do you vote?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. And I think that we actually need to modify the wording of that, Betsy, is to recommend to the full school committee to waive instead of just the exact wording as it is.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Next item on the agenda is, and Sasha, thank you. Thank you, Sasha. I really appreciate it. It's wonderful to see you, and thank you for everything that you do.
Oh, thank you
Much
so much,
appreciated.
Pretty Dear. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Next item is discuss first drafts of the FY25 budget development calendar and FY25 budget development priorities. So you all received the budget development calendar, and as in prior years, there's a really detailed calendar talking about all the different stuff, but there's only the 4 key dates up at the top that are the calendar. And those dates are, let me pull it up. They're the equivalent of the dates we had last year. So the budget book being available January 12th, 2024, the presentation to school committee of the FY25 initial budget request on January 18th, so about a week later. And there's public comment at that session. February 1st is the official public hearing, which is a requirement of state law. And then February 8th would be the vote to send the budget, that initial budget request to the town administrator. Any thoughts on those or on the rest of the document? If go ahead, Suzanne.
Yeah, I don't want to nitpick here, but I am going to for just a minute. You have twice a review of summer school. And I'm wondering if we might want to call that preview of summer school.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
And one's in November, which is pretty early, but that's okay if you think that's the right time. But I don't know, I thought preview might be better than review since it's going forward.
Right, it hasn't happened yet. No,
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. And the thing is though, like when we get into the budget season, then the summer school, and then everyone's all busy, and I feel like decisions have already been made about summer school. So I think I pushed it earlier than we talked about doing it in January last year, and then that didn't happen. I just thought, let's maybe try and get it before the budget season so we can hear about what the plans are. Yeah, really, while the summer programs are still going on. So up to you, but no, but a preview sounds good. Helen on the
Actually, I think your word review was good because you need to know what happened during the summer. You know, did they make their budget? I mean, how much? Summer school has been,
Yeah, so maybe it's a review
can
preview.
remember.
And actually yesterday at curriculum, when Jody showed those numbers of base, I wanted to ask, but I didn't, but I thought it's not the place in curriculum because they were down by almost 200 students year on year. So exactly, I thought, how does this leave the base
Well,
the
that's
base
separate
revolving
from
fund?
our summer school.
She presented it as part of the summer programs because
I
base is part of,
understand, but what I'm talking about, I think what you're talking about is the high school summer school program.
all of it, all of it.
You're talking about all of it. So, well,
Yes.
either way, I still would like to emphasize that we need to look at the high school summer program, talk with the curriculum coordinator. I think it was Jen Martin who ran
Yes.
it, and what we're doing, is it breaking even? I don't think it needs to make money, but I'd like it to at least be able to break even.
Well, and I personally don't care if it breaks even, but these are good points to make because
Well, okay.
we had talked about increasing the amount of access of students. And for example, students who are locked out of programs during the school year is what we're seeing now are there opportunities. So these are all conversations that if we have them early enough, there's a chance
Yeah.
to I think it is valuable.
I
Okay.
think you can say review summer 23 and preview summer 24.
Yeah,
We are
no, I think that's
vehemently agreeing.
yes, review preview. I'll make that update. Any other comments on the whole document and particularly the 4 dates because we're only recommending the 4 dates to school committee for adoption.
Can I just
Susan?
ask a clarifying question? So when we put this on the agenda, is there an opportunity before we get to that for the committee to be able to share what their kind of outcomes or hopes are for that? Because reviewing summer programs is pretty broad, right? So is it the expectation you would have the high school principal there?
I think what we would typically do is figure out who the presenter is and talk to them in advance about it so that there's no surprises about like what we're up to.
Yeah.
So
and
if
leave
it's going to
out-
be Jen, if it's going to be, oh my gosh, the director of adult ed, whose name I'm totally blanking on right now.
Michelle McGlone.
Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. You know, if we're going to ask Michelle to come, if we're going to ask Jen to come, then we really talk about what that looks like. If it's going to be Jody leading it with them also attending, we just talk through that so everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, and
I
I just
agree.
make sure they have time to be able to generate the data in order
Yep.
to make it a meaningful conversation. And that will take a little bit of effort. So I just,
Yeah, no, it's a good point. It's always a good point to make sure we can't spring these things on people.
right, I don't know who to give a heads up to and what kinds of information you would like them to at least to begin the conversation to share. So
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, that's the good thing is when it's joint with like that one's joint with curriculum and we've been trying to do some of these meetings which are joint. So the policy finance one to talk about the finance policy, this one, we've been looking for opportunities of areas. So this is another one of those. Can we take a vote on the 4 dates to recommend to full school committee? I'm going to move we recommend those 4 dates to the school committee. Suzanne, thank you. Andy, do you second it? How do you vote, Andy?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, thank you. Budget priorities. There's no document drafted. I wanted us to have a conversation because the way we've done that document in the past, to me, it feels like it might be, without having seen the strategic plan in its entirety yet, it feels like it might be competing with the strategic plan. And so I thought this was an opportunity for us to, if we had any thoughts about how to approach what we want to direct, then we could be talking about that. We might not be ready for this conversation since we haven't seen the strategic plan yet. And if so, that's totally okay. But I did just want to throw that out there as something that we should be thinking about of how our guidance document intersects with the strategic plan. Andy?
Yeah, I guess I would just start with the question of how soon does that document need to be ready? It's just the next time we would be talking about the strategic plan, I mean, Linus will be giving an overview of progress on September 28th. And then I think the school committee will have a more extended discussion at our workshop in, I guess, October 19th. And so that'll be our first real, I think, exposure to the nitty gritty of the strategic plan. And so how much longer can we afford to wait after that, you know, before we'd be able to have this document ready?
So the answer is the sooner we have it ready, the better everything is, but there's been years where we haven't voted it until very late. And maybe for this, like, I guess I don't know, maybe what we should do is come back to this conversation next month, once we've at least gotten the first look at things next month, and see how we might want to approach it. I personally think that we want to be as short and like prescriptive in the things we really care about, but making those as minimal. I feel like the document was, I personally feel like the document was too long last year, and I'd like us to be able to really rely on the strategic plan with just a little bit of extra content. But I think we probably need to see what that looks like first before we make that determination. Does that seem
Yeah. I mean,
reasonable, appropriate?
when this does come before the school committee at our workshop, would we want us to be discussing at that time sort of how the strategic plan and might influence this document, and just be
Yes,
working
please.
kind of at the same time?
David, does that make sense to you too? So we can talk about it all at the workshop, maybe kick priorities over to the workshop?
It does, yes.
Okay. Is Betsy holding the agenda?
Yes, I'll be sure to add that onto it.
Okay, perfect. Does that sound like a good plan to you too, Suzanne?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree that the one we used last year is a little long. I would, as you said, I'd prefer to have it really follow the strategic plan and pull that out and highlight what those are. Yeah, I think that's a good plan.
Okay, great. Next item on the agenda is the budgetary implications of school improvement plans. And you all got this in your packet as well. If you recall, we were presented with SIPs early last winter. I think it was February and March of last year. And 8 of the 10 of them had a budgetary implication slide. 2 of them didn't. 2 of the elementary schools didn't, Baker and I think Ruff and Ridley. I can't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, although they did talk about some of the resources they needed. And I'm not sure that the way that they're structured right now actually really allows for specific budgetary implications to be teased out. But I do think that legally we're required to ensure that we are incorporating SIPs into our budget planning. So I wanted to bring those out early in the process so that if there are opportunities, first off, to hear what the subcommittee thought about if there's a way or how we want to make sure that that happens. And then also, Susan, also, is there an opportunity in your budgetary process? I don't know if you've started yet on the FY25 calls for like requests for budget from the principals, but okay, so if not, is this an opportunity for us to, make sure that there's some sort of, what do you need to achieve your SIP? Suzanne?
I believe, I could be wrong, that the SIPs were good for 2 years, so they don't have a new one.
Some are and some aren't. Some of them were single year, I recall.
Okay.
I believe if I went back and looked at some of them, and some of them were multi-year and some of them weren't for reasons. Like I think maybe Monica's was a single year because, or I don't remember now, maybe she had already announced she was retiring and so she wasn't going to do it more than 1 year.
I mean, I looked through the implications and there wasn't much there.
Yeah.
They really weren't asking for much. It didn't reveal much about what their plans were. I mean, you have to look at it with the plan, but there wasn't much there. And the little that was there was mostly professional development will be provided by the district.
Yeah.
That seemed to be the way. And so, I would always love for the individual schools to have some kind of a budget that helps them specifically with their school improvement plan, but I don't think we've done that much in the past. So I don't know, Susan, I'm kind of looking for something more that we can individualize these plans and their budget implications for the schools.
While you respond to that, Susan, I need to jump away for 1 second and I'll be right back. But you guys keep talking about how we can work SIP into the budget. I'll be right there.
Great. Typically the priorities of the school committee would be established before I'd ever roll out a budget process internally. Included in that is considerations for what your strategic plan is, the SIPs, and how the SIPs align to the strategic plan. And then we develop the budget. Those are the areas that are focus areas for when we're creating the financial plan. The financial plan is nothing more than the financial representation of the educational plan. And so I think, you know, to the point made earlier, that, you know, we're kind of a little out of sequence right now because we don't have the strategic plan clearly articulated yet. And so I think maybe that influenced also what the SIPs were written for, because that strategic planning process occurred last year. So we're going to be a little bit behind this year, but what I will do is provide them with, you know, here are some of the items in your SIP, and here's the strategic plan. To the extent possible, let's frame our budget narratives around how our requests this year, being FY25, align to what those priorities are. So normally we would be having this conversation at this time, and then once we have approved what those priorities are, again, I would then begin communicating with our budget managers, you know, what the priorities are of the board, and allow them to develop their budgets in service to that.
Yeah, thank you. I guess that's what I'm feeling, a little out of sync here, that,
Yeah, we are.
okay, because I'm looking at those and I'm saying there's really not much in there. But it's because they don't really have the strategic plan yet to review their school improvement plans to see if that in fact brings that forward, and then what they would need at their school level.
Can I ask a question about that though, Suzanne? To me, and hang on one second, Carolyn, the strategic plan is really at the district level, but the school improvement plan is whatever their sort of local unique.
Right, but
Am I understanding it right? I mean, it should be
And
not
both.
out of, it shouldn't be, right? It shouldn't
But
be
it
out
should
of
be-
sync with.
it should reflect what the district strategic plan, let's just say that the district says, you know, we have concerns about ELA in the K-8, right, curriculum or in our coursework. Then at a local school, they would look at their ELA and say, yeah, you know, we really are doing well with emergent early readers, but we're not doing so well in writing. So on the ELA part at our school, we're going to focus on writing. And then this is what we're going to need to make that happen.
Because I also thought there was things like, just to give one example, Ruffin Ridley was in 2 buildings. I think this was even one of their topics. And then they came back and they were talking about how they rebuild community. And that's not tied into a strategic plan imperative. That's
I
just
actually think there
a local
probably is
issue.
something, there may be something in the strategic plan that talks about relationships and
Okay,
culture.
so generally, yes, community building and so forth. Okay,
Yeah,
fair enough.
yeah.
Okay.
So then they would take that and they would apply that to their school, and they'd say, well, we in particular need to do this because of our recent history.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Makes sense. Thanks. Carolyn?
Thanks. Hi, and I was just switching from my car to my house, so I don't know if I missed something. This might just be sort of rookie question. So, or no, actually, so one of the things I saw the last slide, beep, maybe I'm just reading this wrong, but I thought the conversation last year was that beep resolved they were going to raise their tuition, so that, does this slide indicate that they anticipate generating $700,000 more and then spending that? Or does that 700,000 indicate that they'll be looking for that from the budget? Because I thought that that was going to be covered by the raise in tuition.
And it's none of it's for this year anyway, which is when
It's-
these, so.
Yes, I
think
understand that.
I think that the
But
budgetary
the
impact from the BEAP
conversation about
one,
raising
it's-
tuition, sorry,
it was
the
meant to be cost
conversation about
neutral,
raising.
operating budget neutral.
The conversation about raising tuition wasn't for this year. It was for the next year.
Right. But it would, the conversation was also that it would be operating budget neutral, to your point.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that means that this slide just indicates that's money they're gonna earn and then spend.
I don't know if it's that clear, but yes, that is what we ultimately arrived at. I don't know if the thinking, because if you recall, the thinking on BEAP had evolved during the winter. So this could have been presented before we got that clarity. Remember, these were all presented in like January, February,
Oh,
March.
yeah, okay.
These were
I
very
see.
early in the process.
I
Yeah.
see. I didn't realize where these slides came from.
Yes, sorry. These are old slides from the
Ah.
very beginning when we were presented with the SIPs last year.
Oh, okay, that totally makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
And I did have one other question, just as, which is sort of, like when I see, looked through these, so like something with Lawrence, fine tune the Lawrence Middle School grading for equity structure based on Joe Feldman's book, Grading for Equity. So is that a typical sort of school improvement type of thing? And is that kind of change typically seen like where one school just decides we're going to grade this way?
It's
Maybe
interesting you mentioned that, and Suzanne, correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember asking about that back then because multiple schools were doing this. But for whatever reason, some of them, I think all of the middle schools were doing this as a larger project, and some of
Right.
them included it in their
Right.
SIPs, and some of them didn't. And so it came
Okay.
out actually, it's a broader district project, but was referenced by several schools, but
Right.
not all of them.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Thanks, Maria.
Sure. Suzanne, does that what you remember as well? Am I on
Yeah, it
outer
is, and I
space or
think
am I-
there was another school that also put that in. And
Right, but when the second school put it in, I asked why only the two of them, and then it turned out that all of them were doing it.
doing the
I think.
work, yeah. But some either emphasized it more, or they felt that they would impact their budget, and others didn't think it would impact their budget. Because
Yes.
that's what they were asking in those slides. How will this impact your budget?
Right. Andy?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to Suzanne's observation that like there really doesn't seem to be very much here in terms of proposals that have major budgetary impact. Like I haven't been on a site council, so I'm wondering, is there some kind of maybe implicit belief on site councils that they shouldn't be proposing things that have a big impact, right? And if we kind of remove that belief, then they would be proposing other things that might actually cost money, and that might actually be what we want them to do, right?
Should we be talking about having a school, what do you call them? School impact plan? Now I'm drawing a blank. What does the I stand for? Improvement, sorry, improvement plan. A school improvement plan fund or dollars, like we have a PD bunch of dollars where people then ask for money for their initiatives.
Maybe
Whether
I'm
it's by school.
speculating that maybe people think they don't feel free to propose things that cost, right?
I wonder too, because the schools don't have discretionary budgets, so, or they have like tiny ones, and so does it actually, is there this even unintentionally by the principals who are also on the school site councils, this thinking that they don't have any money to be able to do this, to your point? Susan, what do you think about this?
Well, yeah, I found it interesting that the SIPs were being presented in January. I guess more typically I've seen them presented at the end of the year in June in anticipation of the upcoming budget cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So the process I've typically seen is that SIPs are presented, the board adopts them, and then the priorities of the board, they take into consideration kind of the SIPs and the information there, as well as the strategic plan, and then establishes the priorities. And then the priorities are then, what drives your budget process moving forward. And the combination of district level initiatives and SIP initiatives are then kind of what generates the educational plan that then I provide you with what it's going to cost to deliver. Do you see what I'm saying? So some I think we should have a bigger conversation about, why it could, because I don't know. I mean, why?
Can I give you a little bit of background, which was
Yeah.
that for a couple of years, people weren't doing these, maybe 3 years. And so it was a really big priority of school committee and Linus to have school improvement plans have a return to practice. And so that was something that I think was a focus of the building leaders and such last fall, and that's why we saw them in the winter. So those were the first ones we had seen in years. So we're getting, but exactly. So we're getting back into the site, the process. I'm also wondering, to your point of, they were presented out of sequence for the budget year, Is this something where we should be seeing them in, and David, this is a question for you and you, Susan, asking them to be presented in October, November, so that it's ahead of the budget cycle somewhat, or at least concurrent with the budget cycle for this year?
We
I know
usually
it's like mid-September, so that's a really obnoxious if they're not already designed, but
it wouldn't be possible. I think what we have to do is flag, where we're out of cycle with certain things. Maybe some of the work that we do is to engage in conversation around what ought that cycle look like,
yeah,
so that we're not being reactionary, more that we're looking futuristic about. And I think it's a perfect time, actually, because with introducing this new strategic plan, this gives us the opportunity kind of for a reset. And so if we're resetting on the SIP process, then maybe we can just have a conversation about what order these things would occur in a normal budget cycle. And I can talk to senior leadership about that and principals about some of the ideas that we have around this. Yeah, I don't think we're not gonna get on cycle this year. It's
okay.
This year is a learning year for me with you. And then what we learn and what we would like, we can then create for the following year.
I think that sounds reasonable. And David and Andy, Betsy, have this SIPs for this year been docketed at all or not yet? Okay. So I guess we'll get them presented to us at some point this year, and then hopefully we'll get next year's presented in summer sometime so that we can see them in time for the budget cycle, as you're saying, Susan, as part of an entire budget process that gets laid out.
Exactly. And the other part is your school advisory council has a role in the budget development if you get on cycle, right? So this is approved in June and it's really forward thinking, review how they've, the work that they've done for the year, because you're kind of leaning towards the end of the year then. And then what is it that we would be looking for the future? Because what you're going to approve in a SIP at the end of the year is not going to be implemented the following year. Do you see what I'm saying? Because that budget cycle is already landed. It takes a lot.
Yes, right. It's for the following year.
It's for the year you're preparing your budget for, which is the following year.
Yeah.
And so it gives you the opportunity to build into your process reflection and then course correction, as well as, so you're evaluating constantly against what your strategic plan is. How did we do? These were our priorities. How did we land? Because we're going to plan and then we're going to have reality hit us. And so some of the things that we plan on doing, we're not going to be able to. And some things that we didn't think we'd make as much progress on were accelerated, right? So you have to do the reflection, and then that influences what the priorities are for the upcoming year. So it's really a nice process once we can get kind of back into those processes. So the SIP would be approved at the end of the year, and then the priorities would be set in the summer that take into consideration the SIP, and then we would begin to build the budget, based on that. And then the advisory council would then have the opportunity, while the budget's being built, to then reflect on how does this educational plan and the funding for that marry to our SIP goals. Do you see what I'm saying? So it fits into the conversation that should take place, throughout the year on school improvement as well as district improvement. So that's kind of the flow that, maybe.
Yeah, I think that school committee is very, very interested in having SIPs be an integral part of this. And I like the way you're thinking about how to get it all laid out. And I think it'll be really good to have that budget process. Andy?
Yeah, I mean, given what Susan has been saying, would it make sense to instruct the site councils not to bother with the January plan and just concentrate on doing something?
Don't they legally have to produce the plan? Even if
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure by law they're expected to. Is that
right? But not in January. So we can say
they might have. There's a difference between the plan existing and being presented to us. I guess that's those are different things.
Yeah, I'm just suggesting that, like, in order to avoid kind of spinning one's wheels this year, just get it on cycle. Like, don't bother with the off cycle one this year, and just get a good one done for May and June that can actually inform next year's budget process.
That's what I would suggest.
I mean, they could use last year's. I think some of them were designed to be 2 years, so they could just.
Some of them were, yeah.
They could just review what they have, and unless there's some real course correction they want to do, they can stick with the plan last year will be this year's plan as well.
Right, I don't think any of them were a single year. They were all multi-year.
I think one or two were. They varied. So David, remember some of them were even 3 years, I think.
Right, I think
I
there were
thought they-
2 and 3. I don't think there was one that was only 1, but even if there is, I endorse Susan and Andy's suggestion. We want
Yeah.
to make planning meaningful.
Right.
That sounds good.
So how would we
How-
get it out? To
Yeah,
the
exactly.
people
I was
that,
like-
okay, like do it on this cycle, and here's the rationale for it, and be aware
Yeah.
that the whole purpose of this is so that this can actually influence budget development.
How do we, and not just get that to principals, but I think get it to the membership of the school site councils too.
Exactly. And then I can work with the principals and the site council so they understand like their role in it. And, we'll
this-
have conversation about, this is the strategic plan, and I can help, build capacity for maybe a different way of approaching our work.
I'm wondering, because we have the parent leaders meeting, which includes the school site council members, Andy. Betsy, is our first school committee led one coming up in October? Or when is our first school committee one?
Let me check with Kathleen and I will confirm that for you.
Okay. Because that could be an opportunity for Susan to talk about it with the principals and for school committee to also talk about it with school site council members. We'd have to get our story straight to make sure we're giving the same information, I think. But I think it might be nice to have it come out through various multiple channels so that we're reaching people in different places where they are.
Right. And we can hear more about, what their process is now and what they
Yeah.
value in the process that they have, so that we're not, I think we should honor what's working well and what people, feel is helpful.
We, just so you know, Susan, there's a monthly meeting with parent leaders, which includes PTO co-chairs and others, like executive committee of PTO, plus the school site council members and other people, like chairs for the Innovation Fund, BEF, a couple other sort of educational entities in town. And every month they meet, it's alternating months, once with Linus and then once with school committee. It used to be with the superintendent every month. And last year we instituted a month on, month off with each party, which seems to be working really well because it gives school committee a chance to interact, and they like that too.
And
So
what's that group called?
called the parent leaders. It meets once a month. So I think it is an opportunity to talk to them as well. So maybe we'll take that as the decision on, as part of this, as you're saying, is to park the whole thing for a year and come back to it, not for a year, but basically come back to say, we really want you to generate something for June that's going to be then in place for over the summer for budget development for FY26.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And it's really a reset. Like I said, we're going to introduce this strategic plan. People need to absorb that. What we want them to do is be making meaningful, choices, as we move forward with the educational plan. Again, the money part is just a financial representation of the educational plan, right? And we're resetting that at the educational priorities through the strategic planning process. Likewise, the schools will have, kind of their mini strategic plan that should align with our broader strategic plan. And that's what I think Suzanne did such a great job of explaining, that they're interconnected and related. So in order to be able to get alignment, really, and to be able to focus, our resources and our energy towards really accomplishing deep and meaningful improvements, we need to have this kind of alignment and cycle of our work. So
that's great.
Yeah.
Thanks. I think that's our entire agenda. Did I miss anything, Betsy? I got it all right. Yeah, I got it all. Any other old or new business people want to bring up? Okay. Well, we're going to wrap up 15 minutes early. Thank you, everybody. This was really great conversation, and I appreciate it. And we'll be back next month with more. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Yes, you as well. Thank you.